Hey everyone, my name is Prince, and welcome back to another video talking about Max Steel. It's always a good day when we're talking about Max Steel. You know, I genuinely think that Max Steel might actually be my favorite out of all the franchises I cover on this channel. Don't tell COD Zombies, The Legend of Spyro, Arthur, and Dinosaur King though, they might get a bit jealous. Now, the main videos I've made for Max Steel so far are sort of split into two categories. Sort of compilation discussion videos where I go over multiple different types of a certain thing within Max Steel, like all the turbo modes or all the elementors, or reaction videos to the actual episodes themselves. But for a while now, I've wanted to do videos in the same sort of style that I do for Dinosaur King, being sort of singular videos focused around a very specific part of the lore, as these will not only help me continue to spread the Max Steel reboot to people that may not have seen it, but also talk about portions of the lore that aren't really talked about that often. And we're starting off this new batch of singular Max Steel videos with a video talking about arguably one of the coolest things in the Max Steel reboot, the Turbo Star. As always, if you don't want to miss any future videos or live streams from this guy right here, then make sure to go join the casual Discord in the description down below if you want to be part of my community and you also want to be automatically pinged whenever I upload or go live. And also, if you're a Max Steel fan and you want somewhere to come and chat with other Max Steel fans, then also go join the Max Steel unofficial Discord, also in the description. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get right into it. So what is the Turbo Star? Well, the Turbo Star was something introduced in the second season of Max Steel. The Turbo Star was a turbo-powered super weapon created by Max's father, Jim McGrath, and was intended to be Entek's ultimate weapon against Machino should he ever return to Earth after the first Machinian invasion. So what does the Turbo Star actually do? Well, they never actually go into detail as to how the Turbo Star actually works, but as far as I can tell, it seems to be some sort of turbo energy amplifier. It takes the turbo energy of a Taconian like Jim or Max, and as Max would put it, cranks it up to 11 and weaponizes the turbo energy of said Taconian, which usually can't be like fired from a Taconian's body as a projectile without the use of something exterior like steel or the console from part 1 of the Season 1 finale, and transforms it into a deadly and powerful blast of turbo energy. Now, the actual Turbo Star itself appears to only be 3 small pieces, which combine together to form a sort of metal ring that spin rapidly while the Turbo Star is in use. It's unclear as to how these pieces actually work, but as far as we can tell, the Turbo Star can't work without those 3 pieces. So if it is a turbo energy amplifier, the pieces themselves are the actual amplifier, and all the other pieces that we see connected to the Turbo Star appear to just be extras to help it work, like pieces to help the Taconian interface with the Turbo Star. Now, despite what the Turbo Star actually does being consistent throughout the show, there actually appears to be 2 different variations of it, that while they technically do the same thing, they're used in different ways. The first variant of the Turbo Star was seen in episode 3 of season 2, Dread Ascendant. One night, Max has a dream where he accesses some of Steel's lost memories and has a flashback to the incident that killed his father. As many of you know, in the first season of Max Steel, we learn about Max's father and that he invented turbo energy, but unfortunately he ended up dying during an accident involving one of his experiments using turbo energy. But it's here in episode 3 that we finally learn that the mysterious experiment that Jim died within was actually the first test of the Turbo Star. Now, the first variant of the Turbo Star that we see in this flashback appears to be a turbo-powered surface-to-orbit laser. The Taconian in question sits within a sort of cradle facing upwards with the Turbo Star against their chest and firing a beam of turbo energy through a trio of metal spires that may also be amplifiers as well. Due to Dredd intervening and causing the accident, we never actually see the full power of this variant, but presumably this would have been Entech's ultimate defense against Machino's Alphaling, firing a concentrated beam of turbo energy at the Alphaling, getting rid of its shields in one shot, or maybe even destroying it entirely. So as far as I can tell, the original variant of the Turbo Star appears to be akin to something like the Ion Cannon from Star Wars, or even the Death Star laser potentially, but alas, after the accident, that variant of the Turbo Star was discontinued, with the destroyed remains of the Turbo Star cradle being left to rot in its hidden Entech chamber. So now it's time to move on and talk about the second variant. Now, due to the fact that most of Season 2 is assembling and gathering the pieces of the Turbo Star, we don't actually see the completed variant until the end of the season. In the final countdown part 1, the main cannon of the Daedalus platform, Entech's flying battle platform that they're using to target the Alphaling, has been disabled by Machino's forces, and they realize there's only one option left. Max has to use the Turbo Star. Now, the second variant of the Turbo Star is a lot smaller and more portable than the original. As opposed to the first variant, which seemed to draw directly from a Taconian's turbo energy, this variant appeared to be a portable handheld turbo cannon that, like a lot of Max's other turbo gear, worked by having steel interface with it, allowing Max to channel his power into the cannon. Now, although this variant probably wasn't as powerful as the first variant, it certainly packed a punch, as although we only saw it being used very briefly, we saw it being used to generate a gigantic ball of turbo energy that was strong enough to punch a hole in the Alphalink shield. Not to mention that when it was used to shoot Mega Elementor, it was powerful enough to forcefully unlink all 5 Elementors. Now, why this variant actually exists is a little bit of a mystery, and as far as I can tell, there are 2 possible explanations. Number 1, the second variant that we see in the finale was actually the original design of the Turbo Star, and then they realized how powerful it was gonna be, and then turned it into the surface to orbit laser that we see in the flashback. Or number 2, this variant of the Turbo Star was actually designed after the accident, which would explain why instead of destroying the one piece that he found, Forge locked the piece away because he always knew that just maybe the Turbo Star would be needed to defeat Machino. But whatever the reason for its existence, it was certainly a badass weapon, and the moment where Max first uses it to break through the Alphalink shield is one of the hypest moments in all of Max Steel. Like, seriously, I get goosebumps every time I watch that scene. Now, unfortunately, despite the immense power of the Turbo Star, it does come with a pretty dangerous weakness, and that appears to be that the Turbo Star itself is incredibly unstable. It appears that the Turbo Star can actually malfunction when it's interfered with while it's active. This has only happened twice. Once during the initial test when Dredd actually activated his turbo energy siphoning device while the Turbo Star was being fired, and in part 1 of the Season 2 finale where Max was firing the Turbo Star at Machino and he used his weird yellow energy to interfere with the Turbo Star, and both times it results in the user entering slip space and teleporting literal light years away from where they originally were. It also appears that the more powerful the Turbo Star is being used as, the more it has an effect on its surroundings. For example, the first variant, which was obviously being used on a much bigger scale than the second variant, not only teleported Jim, but also teleported Dredd, who was obviously nearby, to the other side of Earth. Whereas when it happened with Max, Machino was basically right next to him, and he wasn't affected at all. Now, I've always found it a little bit weird that they've never actually addressed against this weakness. Because they always talk about the Turbo Star as if the Turbo Star itself is what's dangerous. But the Turbo Star itself is not the problem. The problem is when something exterior interferes with it. And I feel like they could easily come up with some sort of modification for the Turbo Star that would protect it from exterior energy sources that would cause it to malfunction. Now, it's not really clear if Forge actually knew that Dredd was responsible for making the Turbo Star malfunction, but Max saw the flashback from the perspective of Steel, and he saw that Dredd was the one responsible for interfering with the experiment and making the Turbo Star go haywire. So why couldn't he just tell Forge and have Berto whip up some sort of modification for the Turbo Star to keep them safe from that sort of thing? Then again, Max really isn't the sharpest tool in the shed most of the time, so I don't even know if he would have come to that conclusion. But as I mentioned earlier, the process of gathering the Turbo Star was basically the Dredd arc of Season 2, and it involved Dredd and Max secretly racing against one another in order to gather the 3 pieces of the Turbo Star. The 3 Turbo Star pieces broke apart in the initial accident, and just like Dredd, were teleported all over the world. The first piece was teleported inside a rock wall in the middle of the South Pacific. The second piece didn't travel far and teleported into the bottom of Copper Canyon Mine, and the third piece was discovered sometime after the accident by Forge, who built a secret Entech base to keep it safe. The 3 pieces were all gathered by Dredd, but unfortunately, he had a problem. Dredd was planning to use the Turbo Star against Makino, but unfortunately, it seems as though the Turbo Star can only run on turbo energy, and is apparently unable to run on negative turbo energy. Okay, little bit more clarification from Editing Prince right here. I've talked about negative turbo energy a bit before, I'll probably make a whole video on it, but for those of you who don't know, that's what Dredd uses. The red energy that he uses to attack Max, that's negative turbo energy. And I was rewatching the Great Turbo Star Caper, and when Dredd uses the spare turbo energy to try charging up the Turbo Star, it does look like it's glowing with negative turbo energy. So if I had to make a guess, what's happening here is that the Turbo Star can operate with negative turbo energy, like it can fire negative turbo energy, but it can't really run on it, if that makes sense. Like that maybe it needs a certain amount of turbo energy to run on by itself before it can actually utilize negative turbo energy. Like maybe it's only compatible with negative turbo energy in a very specific way. I'm not too sure about that, and I'll probably make a whole video talking about negative turbo energy, but that's the best I can come up with right now. All I know is that the Turbo Star definitely can't run on only negative turbo energy, because Dredd definitely has plenty of that, and he definitely wouldn't have had any problem if it was capable of running solely on negative turbo energy. So Dredd tried to capture Max to use him to power the Turbo Star, and that resulted in Entech and Max getting their hands on it and allowing them to use it in the finale. Now, funnily enough, despite being set up throughout like the entire season as being the thing that's gonna defeat Makino, after Max gets sent into Slipstream when Makino makes the Turbo Star malfunction, the Turbo Star itself actually breaks. Like, it literally falls into pieces, and Makino steps through them. So, after all of that, the Turbo Star actually ends up getting destroyed. And even if it wasn't fully destroyed after that, given that the pieces were on the Alpha Link when it blew up, we can definitely say that it was probably destroyed. And, you know, maybe that's for the best. Although I still think it would be really easy to get around the instability. And besides, with Max having stuff like Duo Strike and Exo Strength in Season 3, who the hell needs the Turbo Star? And who knows, maybe one day he'll come up with a turbo mode capable of producing the same amount of power that the Turbo Star gave him. Editing Prince here again. I meant to mention this in the original recording, but I completely completely forgot. There is technically a third variant of the Turbo Star that appeared in the live-action movie, which I am actually considering watching and analyzing after I finish the minisode analysis and before I start Max Steel Rewatched. But in that movie's version of events, Dredd and Jim built a core that was capable of harnessing Taconian energy. While most of what we know about this core seems to depict it as a source of power, like a generator that runs on turbo energy with a Taconian plugged into it, during one of Max's flashbacks within Steel's memories, he's able to relive the night that his father died during an Ultralink attack. And as Jim prepares to power the core, he tells Dredd that when the Ultralinks are all in range, to fire. So seemingly this core was actually a weapon to be used against Ultralinks, exactly the same as the Turbo Star, although it definitely seems to work in a slightly different way and doesn't appear to have any of the same instabilities that the regular Turbo Star does. As in this universe, Jim actually died by overloading the core with his own turbo energy instead of the core malfunctioning and taking his life. Although Dredd did modify the core so that it was gonna drain him of all of his turbo energy anyway, which may have resulted in him dying anyway, but that was due to Dredd sabotaging it, not the core itself. So that's just something I thought I should mention because that is basically the live-action version of the Turbo Star. It's not exactly the same and it fits into the plot a little bit differently, but it is meant to be the live-action version of the Turbo Star. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that was a video talking about Max Steel's greatest weapon, the Turbo Star. I really hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, leave a comment, or even multiple comments, as that really helps boost this video in the algorithm. And of course, subscribe and go join both the Discords in the description down below. Again, thanks a lot for watching, everyone, and I will see you on another video or stream very, very soon. Goodbye, everyone.